She spent 4 years learning his language, his mother's recipes, the dialect of the village his grandmother came from. She gave herself completely, unreservedly, to a world she was not born into. And on the morning of her wedding day, Ruth Adiz Akafer stood in front of a mirror in her white dress, and she was the happiest she had ever been in her adult life. By noon, she would be standing alone in a church car park, still in that dress, with nowhere to go. This is part 1 of Ruth's story, and before we begin, there is something you need to understand. What they did to her was not an accident. It was a plan. And the man who finally saw her worth, he was watching. The entire time. If someone sent you this video, stay. This story has a part 2 that nobody is ready for. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. Ruth Adiz Akafer was 29 years old. She had grown up in Lagos, the 3rd child of a man who believed in education the way some men believe in God, absolutely and without question. Her father, Emmanuel Akafer, would sit beside her every evening before she went to sleep and say, "You will be something, my Ruth. The world is large and it is waiting for you." Emmanuel Akafer died of a heart attack when Ruth was 16. After that, she went to live with her Aunt Naomi. Naomi was her mother's older sister, a woman built from honesty and warmth and a kind of quiet wisdom that didn't need an audience. She raised Ruth as her own. She fed her, clothed her, pushed her back to school on the days grief made Ruth want to stop. And when Ruth won a full academic scholarship to study economics at a university in London, Naomi held her face in both hands and wept tears she had been holding for 3 years. Ruth arrived in London at 18 with one large suitcase, her father's old dictionary, and the absolute intention of becoming something. She became it. By 25, she was a business strategy analyst at a respectable London firm. She was the one her colleagues came to when a presentation wasn't landing, when numbers needed to tell a story, when a client needed to believe in something they couldn't quite see yet. She had a gift for making complex things feel inevitable. She made people trust the future. What she had not yet mastered, as it turned out, was trusting herself. She met Park Jun-seo at a Korean business networking event in London. She had been invited last minute, a Tuesday evening, a room full of people speaking Korean and Korean-adjacent English, champagne in thin glasses, and the careful performance of professional ambition. Ruth was one of very few African women there, and she was not uncomfortable about it. She had spent years learning to be comfortable in rooms that didn't expect her. She was mid-conversation, explaining West African supply chain economics to a man who clearly hadn't expected her to have an opinion, when she noticed someone watching her from across the room. Park Jun-seo was tall and effortlessly put together. He had the kind of face that was difficult to argue with. He waited until she finished her conversation. Then he crossed the room and said, "I have never heard anyone explain the Lagos port logistics problem quite like that." She said, "Most people haven't thought about it." He smiled. "I have been thinking about it for 3 months. You just solved it in 4 sentences." He asked her name. She told him. He asked if she spoke Korean. She told him she was learning 8 months in, studying from podcasts and textbooks and sheer stubbornness. He looked genuinely impressed. Then he said, "Teach me something in Igbo." She taught him Nduo. He repeated it badly, with the accent landing somewhere entirely wrong, and they both laughed, properly, the kind of laughter that surprises you. He tried again, still wrong. They laughed again. It was the beginning of everything. In the years that followed, he would never once try to learn another Igbo word. Ruth noticed this the way you notice a draft in a house, present, persistent, easy to dismiss when everything else is warm. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself love was not a vocabulary test. She told herself that the way he looked at her across a dinner table was more than enough. She was very good at telling herself things. Their first year together was what love stories are made of. He was attentive. He remembered small things. He sent her voice notes in Korean, slow and deliberate, because he knew she was still learning so that she could practice as she commuted. He took her to Korean restaurants and told the owners with something close to pride that she had ordered in Korean. She was glowing in a way that Naomi noticed immediately when she visited in the spring. Naomi sat with Junseo for a Sunday dinner. She was polite, warm, and measured. Afterwards, when he had gone to bring the car around, Naomi said quietly to Ruth, "He is charming, my daughter." Ruth waited for the rest of the sentence. Naomi just smiled and said nothing more. Ruth thought Naomi approved. What Naomi had said in her silence was something entirely different. But Ruth was in love, and love has a particular way of translating silence. In the second year, Mrs. Park arrived from Seoul. Junseo's mother was a small woman who wore her wealth quietly and her disapproval even more quietly. She shook Ruth's hand exactly once upon arrival, brief, dry, perfectly correct, and spent the rest of the weekend speaking Korean only, in a dialect fast and colloquial enough that Ruth, still building her fluency, could only follow parts of it. Mrs. Park knew this. She continued anyway. At dinner on the second evening, Mrs. Park turned to her son and said, in Korean, casually, "The way you say something you believe is private. She is nice. But are you sure this is what you want?" She did not know that Ruth had caught it. Ruth excused herself from the table. She walked to the bathroom. She sat on the cold tile floor with her back against the wall and stayed there for exactly 4 minutes. Then she stood, ran cold water over her wrists, fixed her face in the mirror, and returned to the table with a smile. Nobody noticed she had been gone. That night when Junseo asked how she thought the weekend was going, she said, "Your mother is lovely." And she believed, because she needed to, that she meant it. This was the beginning of the erosion, the kind that happens slowly, the way water takes rock. You don't see it happening. You only notice when the stone is gone. By the third year, Junseo's company was struggling. The startup he had been building since before they met had hit a wall, a cash flow problem becoming a credibility problem. He came home one evening and sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, and Ruth sat across from him and listened for a long time. Then she said, "How much do you need?" He said, "Ruth, I can't." "How much, Junseo?" She had £14,000 in savings, 4 years of discipline and delayed gratification. Her safety net, her emergency fund, the thing she had built for herself in the quiet hours of a life nobody had handed her. She transferred it to his account the following morning. No paperwork, no formal agreement, no contract. She trusted him. She told herself, "We are a team. His win is my win." 3 weeks later, Junseo presented a full business turnaround strategy to his board of directors. The room was impressed. His investors nodded and recommitted. His company was saved. Ruth had written that strategy. She had spent 11 nights on it, after her own full working days, at the kitchen table in the hours between midnight and 3 in the morning. She had given it to him without a second thought. She was in the room when he presented it. He did not mention her name once. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and listened to her own ideas delivered in his voice, and she told herself, "We are a team. His win is my win." She was so practiced at swallowing things. He proposed on a Saturday afternoon in their flat, not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet sincerity that moved her. He got down on one knee and said, "I want to build something real with you. I want to build a life." She said yes. She was crying before the word left her mouth. She called Naomi immediately. Naomi listened to every breathless detail. Then she said, "My daughter, are you sure?" Ruth said, "Auntie, he loves me." Naomi was quiet for a moment that stretched longer than comfortable. Then she said, "I know you love him. That is not what I asked." Ruth laughed and changed the subject and planned her wedding. The week before the ceremony, something shifted. Junseo was distracted in a way that had a specific texture, not the distraction of a busy man, but the distraction of a man who was somewhere else entirely while still standing in the same room. His phone was always face down. He answered messages in bathrooms. He said it was work stress, and she believed him, because she had spent 4 years practicing the art of believing him. The night before the wedding, Ruth sat alone at their kitchen table after he had gone to sleep. She opened her journal and wrote, "Tomorrow I become Mrs. Park. I have never been more terrified and more certain of anything in my life." She closed the journal. She looked at the ring on her finger for a long time. She was right about the terror. The morning of the wedding was golden. Naomi dressed her. 2 friends did her hair and laughed too loudly and played music and made the small flat feel full of light. The gown was extraordinary, a structured white silhouette with Ibo embroidery along the hem and sleeves, beaded and precise, 4 months in the making. When Ruth stood in it fully and turned to face the room, everyone went quiet. Naomi took her face in both hands. She looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Your father would weep." Ruth laughed and cried at the same time. She took a photograph of herself in the mirror and sent it to Junseo. He responded with a single heart emoji, nothing else. The church was full. 180 guests, Nigerian family, Korean colleagues, university friends, the careful architecture of 2 lives built into one. The flowers were perfect. The light through the church windows fell in the way that light falls in places where people come to believe in things. Junseo stood at the altar. Ruth could not see his face clearly from the entrance. The music began. Ruth walked, the room rose. She walked down that aisle the way she had walked through every difficult room in her life, shoulders back, chin forward, as if the fear behind her eyes was a private matter between her and God. She had walked that way through her father's funeral, through scholarship interviews, through rooms that didn't expect her. She had walked beautifully through every hardest moment. She reached the altar. She looked at Junseo. Something was wrong. His eyes were not on her. They were fixed on a point above her head and behind her, at the back of the church, as if something there had stopped him mid-breath. Ruth turned. A woman was standing at the back of the church, Korean, elegantly dressed, completely still. She should not be here. The music faltered, stopped. A guest near the back murmured, then another. The sound spread across the room like a ripple. Junseo's face had gone the color of something drained. The woman walked slowly, deliberately up the center aisle. The guests on either side leaned away as she passed. She stopped 10 feet from the altar and looked directly at Junseo, and she spoke in Korean in a voice calm enough to be terrifying. "You told me it was over. You told me you were handling things. You told me to wait." She paused. "I waited. Now I am asking you in front of everyone, are you choosing her, or are you choosing the truth?" The silence that followed was the loudest sound Ruth had ever heard. She turned back to Junseo. She needed one word from him, just one word, the simplest word in any language. No, just no, Seo-yeon, you are at the wrong wedding. No, leave. He took one step back. Not toward Seo-yeon, not toward Ruth, just back, away from the altar, away from the moment. His hands were shaking and his jaw was moving, but nothing was coming. Ruth said his name, quietly, like a question. He finally spoke. His voice broke on the first syllable. The microphone at the altar was still live, and every word he said filled every corner of that church. "Ruth, I'm sorry, I thought I was ready. I thought I had moved on, but she came back and he stopped, started again. I can't do this, not knowing what I know now, I'm sorry." Ruth did not move. The church was not breathing. She said very quietly, and the microphone caught this too, "Knowing what you know now, Junseo. What did you know 4 months ago, 3 months ago, last night?" He had no answer. From the front pew, a movement. Mrs. Park stood. She did not look at Ruth. She looked at her son, cold, composed, without a single line of surprise on her face, and she said in Korean, "It is time to go." And in that moment, standing in her wedding dress at an altar she had planned and paid for and prayed over, Ruth Adiz Okafor understood something. The understanding arrived not like a revelation, but like the last piece of evidence in a case she had been refusing to see. Mrs. Park was not shocked. She was not disturbed. She was not a woman caught off guard at her son's wedding. She was a woman watching a plan arrive at its conclusion. She had known about Seo Yeon's return for months. She had facilitated her presence in that church on that day, at that hour. She had arranged the destruction of this woman with the same quiet precision she brought to everything. She had waited and watched. And now she was standing to leave. Ruth had spent 4 years trying to be enough for a family that had already decided she wasn't. She had learned their language and cooked their food and sat through dinners where she was invisible and held herself together on cold bathroom floors and told herself that love was patient, that love was enough, that she was building something real. She had given them her savings and her strategies and her silence and her best years. And they had used every single thing she gave them, and then they had planned this. She stood at that altar and she looked at them, at Jun Seo, who was a coward, and at Mrs. Park, who was something colder than a coward, and she understood completely and finally that she was never meant to arrive. She was only ever meant to fund the journey. Ruth reached up and removed her engagement ring. She placed it on the altar cloth, carefully, as if it were fragile. She smoothed the fabric around it with 2 fingers. Then she looked up, not at Jun Seo, not at Mrs. Park. She looked at Naomi. Naomi was already on her feet, eyes blazing, jaw set like stone, already moving. Ruth took her hand. They walked out together. The guests on either side stood back and let them pass. Not one person said a word. At the church doors, Ruth paused. She reached up, removed the pin from her veil and lifted it from her head. She folded it neatly over her arm. Then she walked out into the daylight. She did not run. She did not crumble. She simply left the way dignity always leaves a room that no longer deserves it. If she deserved better than what happened in that church, drop the word Ruth in the comments right now. Let her feel it, wherever you are watching from. The weeks that followed were a specific kind of quiet. Ruth stayed with Naomi in a small flat in East London. The wedding dress hung on the bathroom door because neither of them could bring themselves to move it. It hung there for 11 days. The messages came in waves, some compassionate, many not. Screenshots of the church had circulated. Someone had filmed part of it on a phone, and it moved quickly through WhatsApp groups and social media threads and the particular cruelty of public commentary. Ruth's name appeared next to words she had never been called. She read some of them. Then she stopped reading. Jun Seo sent a text 3 days after the church. It read, "I hope you're okay." Ruth stared at those 4 words for a very long time. She placed the phone face down on the mattress. She lay back and looked at the ceiling. She did not respond. She was not eating much. She was not sleeping through the night. She would surface at 2 or 3 in the morning from dreams she couldn't name and lie in the dark of Naomi's spare room, listening to the city below, feeling the weight of a grief that had no bottom. It was not only Jun Seo she was grieving. It was 4 years of herself. 4 years of choices that had made sense in the moment and were now assembled into a portrait she barely recognized. And then the professional world got involved. Jun Seo's company, protecting its reputation ahead of an upcoming investment round, quietly began reshaping the narrative through mutual professional contacts. The story that circulated was this: the Nigerian woman had been volatile. The Nigerian woman had been unstable. The situation at the wedding had been as much her doing as anyone's. There were red flags, they said. There had been concerns for some time. These things were not true, but truth, Ruth was learning, is surprisingly easy to drown. Her line manager called her into a meeting and could not look her in the eye. He said there were concerns. He said there had been information circulating. He said, with the language of a man reading from a prepared statement, We think it best if you take administrative leave while we review certain matters." Ruth's hands gripped the arms of her chair. She asked what information. He shifted in his seat. She was walked out of the building with her belongings in a cardboard box. Her colleagues watched from behind glass walls. One of them, a woman Ruth had mentored for 2 years, pushed and praised and advocated for in rooms she hadn't been invited into, turned away as Ruth passed. She had given that company 6 years. 6 years of early mornings and working weekends and ideas that became their headlines. And they let her go because a lying man had more allies than she did. The next blow came from the apartment. The flat where she had painted the walls and chosen the furniture and made a kitchen she was proud of. The lease was in Jun Seo's name. A formal letter arrived from his solicitor. 30 days to vacate. Her savings were gone. The £14,000 undocumented, unrecoverable. His lawyer's letter did not mention it. Naomi arrived with a rented van. They moved Ruth's things in an afternoon. Ruth stood in the empty flat for a final moment, in the kitchen doorway, looking at the space that had been hers and was now nothing. She walked out without looking back. They always talk about heartbreak as if the heart is the only thing that breaks. Nobody tells you about the bank account, the apartment, the professional network, the career, all the quiet things a woman builds around a love she believes will last. Then came the family video call. Her mother, her uncle, 2 aunts all crowded around a single screen in Lagos. Her mother said, "Ruth, you are almost 30. This thing that happened, you must put it behind you. Find a good man, a Nigerian man this time, someone our people know." Her uncle said, "Were we not telling you from the beginning? These things don't work, you did not listen." Ruth said, very quietly, "A Nigerian man could also leave me at an altar, uncle." The call ended badly. Ruth sat alone in Naomi's spare room after, the small room with the single window that looked out at the gray street, and she pressed her forehead against the cold glass. The cruelty of society is that it offers a drowning woman a complete list of all the reasons she should have learned to swim. It does not extend a hand. 3 months passed. Ruth found a small freelance role translating Korean business documents for a legal firm. The pay was modest, the work was solitary, and she took it specifically because she refused to let what had been done to her take the language she had earned. She had paid for Korean with 4 years of her life. It belonged to her. She lived in Naomi's spare room. She had lost weight she hadn't intended to lose. She still woke sometimes at 3 in the morning and needed a moment, just a moment, to remember why. She kept a handwritten journal. The entries were short and factual, as if she were afraid of what would surface if she wrote freely. Then Seo Yeon posted a photograph. Ruth was scrolling through her phone late on a Tuesday evening, a habit she had tried to break and kept returning to. The way you press a bruise to confirm it's still there. Seo Yeon's profile appeared. Ruth looked. It was a photograph from Bali, Seo Yeon and Jun Seo at a resort. She was laughing. He had his arm around her. The light was golden and the caption read, "Finding our way back." 847 likes. Ruth looked at it for a very long time. She did not like it. She did not comment. She blocked them both. Then she put her phone face down on the bed and went to the window. Outside, London was quiet and wet. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. There is a particular kind of pain that has no name. The kind that comes from watching someone celebrate the wound they gave you, when their joy is built entirely from your ruin, and you are alone in a small room with nowhere to put the weight of it. Ruth did not cry that night. She had learned slowly, without wanting to, that some pain goes too deep for tears. It simply lives in you, like a stone in the chest that you carry everywhere and eventually forget is there until something shifts and you feel it again. At midnight, Naomi knocked softly and came in with 2 cups of tea. She sat on the edge of the bed beside Ruth and did not speak for a while. Then she said, "Do you remember what I told you when your father died?" Ruth shook her head slightly. I told you that grief is not the enemy. Grief means you loved something real, and real things are worth grieving. Ruth's composure, the composure she had been holding for 3 months through legal letters and family video calls and cardboard boxes, finally came apart. Not in pieces, all at once and quietly. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere very old and very deep. The kind the body does when it has waited long enough. Naomi held her. She did not speak. She did not offer solutions or silver linings or the particular cruelty of telling someone their pain has a purpose. She just held her. After a long time, Ruth said, I don't understand, Auntie. I don't understand what I did wrong. Naomi pulled back and looked at her face directly. You did nothing wrong, my daughter. You loved a man who was not yet honest enough to deserve it. That is not your failure, that is his. She paused the way she paused before something that needed space around it. The tree does not chase the storm, it roots deeper. And when the storm is finished, and it is always finished, the tree is still standing. The room was quiet. Ruth wiped her face. She nodded. She was not yet convinced, but something small and stubborn had begun to move again in the place where hope had been. Not hope exactly. The shape of it, the memory of it, enough to take the next breath. If Naomi's words just landed somewhere in your chest, like this video, so the algorithm shows it to every woman who needs to hear this story right now. 6 months after the wedding, Ruth's translation contract ended. Budget cuts, the firm said. She was grateful for how ordinary the reason was. She sat at Naomi's kitchen table with her laptop open, her CV on the screen. 23 applications sent in 2 months, 4 responses, 2 that went cold when her previous employer came up in conversation. June Seo's reach was longer than she had estimated. She closed the laptop. She put her head in her hands, not crying past crying, just still, in the way that a person becomes still when they have genuinely run out of next moves. When the future, which had always felt like something she was walking toward, had become a gray expanse she could not see across. She opened her journal. She wrote, April 9th. I am 29 years old. I have a degree, 2 languages, 4 years of someone else's investment, and I am beginning from nothing. I am not angry anymore. I don't have the energy for anger. I am just tired. I used to have a future that excited me. I would like to find it again. I don't know where to look. She closed the journal. The kitchen was quiet. The city outside was quiet. Ruth sat with her empty cup and her closed laptop and the specific silence of a woman who has run out of next moves. Her phone buzzed on the table. She didn't look. It buzzed again. She looked at the screen. Unknown number, a Korean country code. She turned the screen face down. It buzzed a 3rd time. A text message. She almost didn't read it. She picked up the phone. She opened the message. It read, Miss Ruth Adiz Okafor, my name is Kang Ti-Yong. I was present at your wedding on March 15th. I watched what happened. I also know what Park Jun-seo did to your work, your finances, and your reputation in the months that followed. All of it. I have something to show you that you deserve to know. If you are willing to meet, I will come to wherever you are. I owe you nothing, but I believe you are owed a great deal. Below the English, a single line in Korean. Ko dungsinan enos, ko hondaka enos, ko inipnida enos. You are not alone. Ruth read the message. She read it again. Her hands were not entirely steady. She did not know this man. She did not know what he wanted or why he was reaching out now or what he believed he knew. She did not know if this was the beginning of something that would save her or another storm arriving in a kind face. What she knew, the only thing she knew, sitting in that kitchen at 11 at night with the weight of 6 months pressing against her chest, was that somewhere, someone had been watching, and that someone had seen the truth. Ruth Adiz Okafor stared at her phone in the quiet of her aunt's kitchen. And for the first time in 6 months, she felt something. She felt something. That is where part 1 ends. Not because Ruth's story is over, but because what comes next, what Kang Taeyong knows, what he witnessed, and what he is about to offer her, that belongs to part 2. Subscribe to AfroK-Stories right now because part 2 drops next week. And what he knows about Park Jun-seo is far worse than anything you have imagined. Before you go, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your city, your country, your flag in the comments. The comment section is Ruth's standing ovation. She earned it.